Welcome back to the Candy Corn Quilt Shop Quilt Along. We are almost done. We're on the week of October 20th. Today we're going to work on section 3, 4, 5, 6 border blocks, and we're going to assemble our quilt top minus the borders. We're going to do borders and embellishments and finish everything next week. I have my border blocks cut. I talked about this at the end of the video last week. I've also already loaded my files. It's going to be the same procedure that we did on last week's video. I have everything loaded into one hooping. I'm going to get my big hoop, the 9.5 by 14, load some light mesh cutaway, and let's head over to the machine. We are over at the machine. We're doing sections 3, 4, 5, and 6. Let's double check and make sure I have everything loaded. This is number 16. This is a section 3. Number 20 from section 3, 22 from section 4. Under section 5, we already did all 3 of the small pinwheels. This little square is number 33, number 36. Those were both in section 5, and then there's one in section 6. That's number 39. I added them all, I moved them all, I made them all fit, I saved them to my machine. So they're ready to go. One thing I was hoping to do this week was to use a different method because these are all cut exact. I thought I'd use my 505 spray. I just picked up the can. It's empty. I don't know why I left it on my shelf. The can is totally empty. I don't have another can. And I ordered a fabric glue stick, the Dritz fabric glue stick. It was supposed to be here yesterday. I think it's still sitting in Texas. So I'm going to have to tape today. I'm kind of bummed. I wanted to try something new and show something new, but it's not here. I'm going to go ahead and stitch all these out to music because this is exactly like we did last week. We'll trim them all together. Let's stitch these out. I'm going to use the green glow-in-the-dark thread for the quilting on all of these. You may have seen my hands in there. What I decided to do is after the first row of quilting went through, it was pretty well tacked down. So I pulled the tape out of the way to keep it from getting caught as it went back and forth and did the quilting. That way I didn't have to pick it out later. Now my machine is going this block, and then I think it's going to do the bottom row, and then the one that's up here last because I actually forgot to add that and I had saved it to memory, so I had to move everything over and add that up top. So that's why it didn't start up here. These are all ready to trim. This is my favorite. I'll make sure to show this on the cutting table. You can really see the green glow-in-the-dark thread on the dark fabrics. These are all ready to trim. I thought I'd show you. I had all these organized. I probably showed this on camera last week or the week before. So they were all clipped, but as you're working with them on your machine, obviously you're taking off the clips. So I made myself a cheat sheet to mirror how it looks on my machine. Here's all the numbers. And then I wrote the little section number and circled it. And then I wrote in the trim size. So now I can sit here and just refer to this. I don't have to refer back and forth to the instructions and try and figure out which block was which, where does it go, and what's my trim size. One thing I did different this time as it was going, once it was tacked down, if it touched the fabric, I was pulling or trimming some of that extra tape so I didn't have to worry about it getting caught in the seam allowance. I've got a little here that'll need to come off, and a little here that I haven't cut yet. This worked much better than last time. Let's get a close-up of this block. This came out really good. This is the green glow-in-the-dark thread. Look how it pops on the black and the purple. That's probably going to be one of my favorite blocks in the whole quilt, even though it's just this little tiny block. It looks great. We're going to go ahead and trim everything. What I'm going to do is actually trim out one at a time instead of like rough cutting them all because I want to keep these in order. I don't want to lose my place. So we're going to start with block 16. I'm going to be using regular rulers today to trim these. Block 16 is going to trim to 2.5 by 6.5. One thing I learned from last week is you can see the trim lines right here on the back. Let's trim this one together. And then the rest I'll give you the trim sizes and I'll speed it up a little bit. Let's just trim this one. I'm just trimming right on those stitch lines, and then we'll measure it just like we did last week and make sure it comes out the right size. If it's off by an itty bitty little bit, it is not going to matter. Here we go. Let's measure. I've got 2.5, and here's the 6.5. So this one I can see is short. I'm going to double check that measurement. Here's a 6.5. Oh, it's like an 1/8 short. So let's take our little sticky note, which is block 16, and I'm just going to make myself a note that on the 6.5 side, I'm an 1/8 of an inch short. Probably not going to matter, but I'm going to keep an eye on it as I'm sewing this through the quilt. Most of the time, I don't even do that. An 1/8 of an inch, not going to matter, but we'll keep an eye on it. Let's go to the next one. The next one I have is number 20. Number 20, it says 2.5 by 4.5. So before I cut this one, I'm actually going to grab a smaller ruler. I'm going to measure my fabric. I can see that it did come in a little bit with the quilting. So this one, I'm going to cut just like this. Instead of cutting on the back side, I've got it measured right now. Let's cut the top two. That way it won't be short and I don't have to make a note. But like I said, honestly, it's going to be fine. It's not going to matter. An 1/8 of an inch here or there for this type of quilt, I just don't think it'll make a difference. If you're really persnickety, be extra careful. So now I'm measuring 2.5, 4.5. I'm going to go ahead and cut right on those lines. And you'll see here, there's a little bit of the stabilizer showing, which is fine. Now this is accurately cut. I don't have to worry about anything. Let's do the same thing for 22. 22 is 2.5 by 4.5. Since two blocks are sewn together, I'm going to go ahead and measure and do that. So we'll cut two corners just like before. It's the same thing. It's a little bit short because of the quilting. So now that I know that, I can sort of split the difference. I've got a little extra here. This also has a pinked edge, and a little extra here, like a thread's width. Let's cut that. And then we'll measure from the other side, and we'll make sure we're 2.5 by 4.5. 2.5, 4.5. There we go. This one has the witch on it somewhere. I'm trying to see it. There it is. Can you see our little witch hat right there? This one's ready. I'm going to do 33 last because 33 is kind of like a placeholder. This is block 39. Let's do 39. Same exact thing. I ended up doing all these in real time. That's okay. Maybe it'll help. Let's cut two straight sides. I can actually see it's a little short again. We'll split it just like before. This is going really fast. Once we're done cutting, we're going to assemble our quilt top minus the borders because we have to measure the top before we cut our borders. Let's go on this side. Make sure we're 2.5 by 4.5. Line that along where I just cut. Looks good. Let's do number 36. Let's cut this 2.5 by 4.5. Looks good. We've got one left. We've got our little 2.5 inch square. These are all done. I'm going to set these aside. Normally I show all the blocks at the end, but we're going to start putting our quilt top together. You want to grab all of your blocks. I've got mine. They're all in their little bags. They're in my Moose Munch container. We got Moose Munch last year for Christmas, and I saved this cardboard basket. I've used it so many times. It's such a great little basket. Go ahead and get all your blocks together, and we're going to pull out the instructions and start putting our quilt top together. We're on page 42 of the instructions. We're going to assemble this in sections. So we have section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we'll piece our sections together, and then we'll measure for our borders, and the borders and the embellishments, backing, binding, I'm going to work on all of that next week. Let's get started with section 1. I know my pictures aren't the best. My printer ran out of one of the colors of ink, so everything looks yellow. I like to look at the picture and lay everything out. I'm going to pull some blocks. And then I'm going to put them on the design board, and I'll show you everything before I sew it together. Let's lay these out. I'm looking at the picture. We've got our show and share, and then we've got our witches. We've got the witch with the stockings, the witch with the curly hair and the corset, and then the witch with the skirt. You can see my design board's not quite big enough, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and just lay them out so I have them in the right order. We're going to have a pumpkin pin cushion. Remember we had two that had the same background quilting? That's one of them. One up there. Large pinwheel. This is why I put notes on everything. I know that this is number 2, top left. When I look at it, I can decide how I want that quilting pattern to go. I think I like it that way. We'll put it right there. We've got our little checkerboard border block. I'm going to put mine this way, so he looks like he's hanging out coming down, and he kind of looks like he's hanging out coming down. That's going to go there. Then we have one of our border blocks. Again, you can see everything doesn't quite fit. When you stretch these out and put them end to end as you're going, remember you're also going to have a seam allowance on here. So that, we're off camera. So off camera, this is kind of how it looks. We have a space here. That's because we have our border blocks 9 and 10. The first thing I have to do is sew together these 2 border blocks. Then I'm going to do this in 2 rows. It's pretty simple. We'll do the show and share and the witches. There's another witch down there, witch border block. We'll have 1 row, and then I'm going to sew all of these together. I'm going to do this off camera. It's really boring to watch me sew. I'm sewing everything with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to press open. I'll do this row and this row. Well, I'll start with that first. And then I'll show you all the pressing from the back. I thought I'd show you this. This is something I do while I'm putting my quilt tops together. This corner is going up. I'm standing over here. I'm going to grab a ruler. Just pick a random line, line it up with that seam, line it up with the top here, and I'm going to trim off that itty bitty little bit extra. This will help when I put the entire quilt together, squaring up your block basically. That's what came off. And then I can check the sides. This looks a little uneven. Now I know the top is straight. I can line up on the seam or along the top. It is a little uneven. Very small amounts. You do not have to do this. I'm going to do this just to make it easier. So when I sew my sections together, I don't have to worry about anything being wonky, a little bit crooked or anything, or any extra tape, anything weird in the seams. This is straight because I cut that straight. Now this is ready to be attached to the other blocks. Here's something else I want to show you. I put together these 2 blocks. This block had a lot of tape like this right along the edge, and I couldn't get all of it out because of the quilting. So when I press this one on the back, instead of pressing open, I press this way toward that block, because if I open that seam, the back of this block has paper. You don't want to iron on paper tape. You will burn it. You'll get yucky stuff on your iron. So I press this one this way instead of pressing open. Getting ready to sew the rows together. You have a couple seams that match. This seam matches and this seam, and that's it. So when you're lining these up to sew together, line up that seam and line up that seam. Here's section 1. It almost all fits on camera. I have a little basket here. I can't move it right now. It's on a pegboard, so sorry if it's in the picture. We've got everything pressed open except that one seam right here that I talked about because of the paper tape. Let's move on to section 2. Here's our layout for section 2 and how I'm going to sew this together. We've got one of our flying geese, one of our border blocks. I need to sew these together. Then they're going to attach to my sewing machine block. Then we have the empty bobbins and the broom parking. I'll sew these together first, and then I'll sew these two to these two. I'm going to go through the same procedure that I did before. Be real careful when you're pressing. This has that faux leather on it. Here's section 2. There were a couple places where I couldn't press open. Right here, and that was because of the tape. And then when I tried to press this open, I ran into trouble right here because of the bulk of the seam, so I just pressed it that way. It doesn't really matter. Where you'll notice a difference is when we go to attach our backing with the stitch in the ditch. It's easier if the seam is pressed open. When they're pressed to one side, like right here, I can feel it. It's higher here and lower here. It makes it a little harder to get that stitch in the ditch accurate. So I press most of these open if I can. Otherwise, if it just won't go in that direction, it's got to go how it wants to go. We're done with section 2. Let's lay out section 3. Section 3 has border block number 16. And this was the one that was a little short on the sides. I'm going to put a clip here and I'll just watch for that as I sew it together. Our fabric shelves, almost scraps, pinwheel, border block number 20. How I'm going to sew these together. These two, these three, then this row to this row. I'm looking at this block. I'm going to turn it this way so the words are right side up. This one, make sure the pennants are the right direction. We're ready to go. Let's sew together section 3. Here's how I sewed this one on because it was a little short. Oop, dog hair. You can see it's a little short on this side and a little more even, but still a little short on this side. I tried to center it. I know not to square this off, and I know when I put this in the quilt, I'm going to use this as the guide. Here's section 3. Went together pretty good. I think I got everything pressed open. I did. Let's move on to section 4. Let's put together section 4. We've got the, oh my gosh, what happened to it when it's stitched out couch right there. We have one of our border blocks, border block 22. And this had the directional quilting witch hat up. And I had made myself a note to place this green orange. Green orange. We've got one more of our pumpkin pin cushions. This is another one with the duplicate quilting. That's going to go there. Wire dress form. And then we have our hoops. Boo hoop. Eek hoop is on the bottom. And Home Sweet Haunted Home. Let's talk about how we're going to put this all together. This is going to sit by itself for a while. Stitch these two together, then stitch the dress to these two, then your couch to those. Your hoops get stitched together, and then they get stitched to this section. I thought I'd show this. I'm attaching the hoops to this section. Let me zoom in. You can see how my seam that was nice and pressed open got flipped and caught. Here's what I do with those, and I learned it from somebody on YouTube, I don't remember, or I would give credit. I'm going to cut just a little bit right here. Don't get into the seam, but I'm just going to snip that like that. Now I can press this seam open without having trouble because that seam was flipped. So now when I go to press open, it'll press like that. Here's section 4. I love the way all the colors came out on this. I wish this would have come out a little bit better. Wouldn't this make a really cute mini quilt? You could just bind this and hang this up. Let's measure it. I'm curious to see how big this is. This is 12, it says 12 1/4, so about 12 inches finished. It's probably the same in the other direction. It looks square. Yep. Really cute. Let's move on to section 5. There's a lot that goes into this one. At the very top will be the Candy Corn Quilt Shop house. I don't have enough room on camera, so I'm going to just set that aside for the moment. You're going to need your little pinwheels. They're going to go in a row, so remember that if you've got, like I do, a certain fabric arrangement for those. And the middle pinwheel has that up and down, so you have to decide how you want that to go. Let's start with 2 pinwheels. and your thimble flowers. These will sew together, and then you'll sew that to the thimble flowers. Then you're going to need your other pinwheel, border block 33, one of the little 2-inch squares. 33 may be velveteen if you did that. I just used fabric. Pumpkin pin cushion. This is the one with the different quilting. So you'll sew these two together and then sew these to your pumpkin pin cushion. We've got a pinwheel block. This has directional quilting. I can see the little witch hat and the witch riding the broom. So I need to make sure I keep that the correct side up. And then border block 36. So pinwheel to pinwheel to the thimble. Pinwheel, pinwheel to the pumpkin. Pinwheel to the border block. Then these two to this section. This to this section, and then on top, right up here, will be your big Candy Corn Quilt Shop. Let's look at section 5. You've got your Candy Corn Quilt Shop at the top. I've got some wonky pinwheels going on here. Make sure when you put this in that you've got this with this flower stem pointing up. You can see this line is not straight. This one had some issues, and this had to do with how these were built and taping, and they just didn't come out quite right. But it's right here. I can see that it's short. When I go to sew this to the next section, it's really obvious that this is straight and this is straight and that's a little short. I'll just need to be careful. There's the bottom. The back pressed open. I had no issues with the pressing. We've got border block 39 in this one. I'm going to hang it that way. It's going to attach to the flying geese. This was the one that I had to make directional. I don't know if you remember that. Just like that. And you've got your dress form, the solid dress form, and the rest in pieces. This is pretty easy compared to what we just did. This to this to this, and then sew the two together. Here's section 6. Let me show you the back of this one. A little bit of bulk with this flying geese block. You can see here, here, and here. It'll be fine when it goes in the quilt. Look at the little spider in the spider web. That came out so cute. We're going to start piecing together the entire top. We're going to start with section 1 and section 2. Make sure they look like they're the same size. So if I match my edges, yep, I'm good there. I don't see any seams that match. This one almost matches, but not quite for me. So check and see if you have any seams that match. Right sides together. I am going to clip this. This is a long seam. I like to use clips instead of pins for these because there's so much bulk, it's hard to work with pins. So use those little quilt clips. Line up the top and make sure it's straight along the side. I'm going to put a clip there and actually one here to hold it as I work my way down putting in the rest of my clips. This will be where I start. Make sure that I'm lined up. If you squared up everything as you went, everything should be straight. I think I did it for part and not for the other part. I'll find out when I go to sew everything together. Yeah, this one seam does, gosh, it almost lines up. It makes me think that it might, see, it might supposed to line up. I'm not sure. I don't know if that made sense. That's not good grammar at all. But it doesn't quite line up, so I'm not going to force it. I don't want my quilt to be crooked. And I'm going to go to the end and actually clip the end. And I'll just clip one of these on camera so you can see how I do this. I'm going to clip this to hold it straight. And then I've got the little bit in the middle. Looks good. There's really nothing to stretch. Everything is already quilted and you have stabilizer. It's different than working with a regular quilt top where you can kind of work stuff in and fudge it if you need to. There's really no fudging with the embroidery stuff. It's a little difficult. There we go. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine, 1/4 inch seam. Here's section 1 and 2 sewn together. This on its own, again, this would make a really cute wall hanging or a mini quilt. It's a nice rectangle shape. Next we have to get sections 3 and 4. Let's see how those lay out. Got our bookshelf over here and then the couch right here. I've got a lot of green going on. I'm really hoping that as this all comes together, I've balanced my colors. I didn't lay everything out like overall, so hopefully this will look good. Sew these two together. I'll come back and show you what that looks like. That came together really well. This seam here does match. Now we're going to sew 1 and 2 on to 3 and 4. So 3 and 4 on the bottom, 1 and 2 on top. Oh, look at that. See? Orange, 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 orange. I could have planned that a little bit better. Everything else looks pretty good. I do have a lot of white together up here. Let's sew this all together. Let's check for matching seams first. We have 2. You've got 1 right here. So it may actually work to my advantage that I have a lot of orange, because if it's off a little bit, you won't see it. And you've got 1 here. So if you want to clip or pin, start with those 2 seams and then work the rest of the way through your quilt. It's too big for the table, so here it is laid out on the floor. We've got those pieces sewn together. Looking good so far. Pressed open on the back. Let's look at these seams. How did I do? Pretty good. And let's go over to the other one. Pretty good. Looks good. Let's go on to the next step. Next step is section 5 and 6. Section 5 and 6. These seams do match. So put those together. Get that seam sewn. Here's 5 and 6. Came together really well. Just the 1 seam right there. Now we need to attach this to sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I need to be mindful of my funky little pinwheel right there. Obviously this isn't going to fit on camera. What I'm looking for is, are there seams that match? Let's go down the quilt together really quick. I don't see anything. Okay, I'm off camera right now. Right at the bottom, I'll bring this up. Right down here by the E-coop, that's the only seam that I saw that matched. So when I fold these right sides together, I'm going to start clipping here and work my way up and make sure I match that seam. And then I'll be careful as I get toward this pinwheel to account for the little shorty in here. And then we'll sew that seam. Then that's going to be our top minus the borders. We have 1 more seam that matches as I'm going bottom to top. Here's your broom parking and the border block. That seam matches between the first and second small pinwheel, so make sure you match those seams. I have to be extra careful because here's where my short pinwheel is. I want to make sure I clip that and then match up this seam. I'm going to finish clipping. I'll sew this up and we'll see what it looks like. We're sewing the last seam. I didn't show my sewing machine. This is a Baby Lock Ballad. That's what I'm sewing on today. This is my favorite machine that I have to sew quilted things because of this digital dual feed foot. I've shown that before. I'm going to go around to the front. It has a little conveyor belt. Now you can see it. See the little black conveyor belt? This helps move the fabric evenly. I don't have to adjust the presser foot or anything. It auto adjusts. Here's my stitch and my stitch length in case anybody's wondering. Let's get this final seam sewn. Here's the top all put together minus the borders. Let's get in, have a close-up. Next we're going to talk about measuring our top and picking the border fabrics. My borders are going to be a little bit different. I'll explain why. Hang in there. Do a final view of the quilt, trying to make sure I don't get my feet in the frame because I'm wearing really grungy slippers. It looks good. Let's talk about measuring. Rather than try and do this on the floor, I'm just going to use this picture. In the instructions, it tells us to measure in the middle up and down, and in the middle across. I like to take 3 measurements. I like to measure the edge, the middle, and the edge, and if they're different, I'll use the average of that for my borders, and then the same thing going in the other direction. We'll do the top edge, the middle, and the bottom. I'll go measure mine off camera, and I'll come back and I'll show you my measurements. That came out much better than I thought it would. Everything was 30 inches. I got 30, 30, 30, and then going across this way, 30, 30, and 30. We're going to use that to measure for our borders, but we're going to be doing quilted borders, and there's also measurements in the instructions. Right here on page 44, we've got borders and binding. It talks about fabric 1 inner border, 1.5 inch width of fabric strips. It's about 40 to 42 inches depending on your fabric. It says to measure 4. That makes sense. My quilt was 30 inches all the way around. That'll easily cover it. Outer border, it says 2 4.5 inch width of quilt and 2 4.5 inch length of quilt. So you have to think about, after you add your inner borders, how much size are you adding to your quilt. We're going to sew those on next week, but if you know it's 1.5 inches and then you're going to lose 1/2 inch in your seam allowance, let's go back to our drawing. So you're going to have another 1 inch there, 1 inch there, all the way around. You're going to end up with another 1 inch, if that makes sense, because the borders are 1.5, but as you attach, you have the 2 seam allowance. It's going to be 1 inch. So this will end up, instead of being 30 inches square, 32 inches square. So if you want to cut these ahead of time and try to cut exact, you can do that. If you have width of fabric strips, since this is only 32 inches square, for your outer border, if you cut 4, it says 4.5 inch wide is their border, width of quilt, length of quilt. If you cut 4 width of fabric, you're going to be covered because we're working with 32 inches square. Let's talk border fabric. This is a picture of the actual quilts when it came out, and of course the fabric kit is no longer available. For my inner border, I found this nice orange yellow. It looks really good with the other fabrics. These are already strips. This was from a quilt that I made. Now the instructions say to cut them 1.5 inches. I'm going to cut them 2 inches. If you've watched any of my other videos where I do the Kimberbell borders, I always run into a problem with the fabric tack down line. It's always like right on the edge. So I'm actually going to cut mine 2 inches wide, knowing that some of it's going to get trimmed off. I have plenty here. I'm not worried about having enough. For the outer fabric, originally I was thinking I would do black and one of the glow-in-the-dark threads. But I have this fabric. I have had this fabric, I don't even know how long. And I've got these nice long strips, and several times I've taken it out and thought about cutting it up for projects, and I thought, no, that's going to waste it. This is the perfect project for this. However, these are not 4.5 inches. If you measure the strips that I have, they're about 4 and maybe 1/4. They're not quite 4.5. So I'm going to be doing something a little bit different with my outer borders. I took a picture of this on the computer. This is what comes with the quilting files for the Candy Corn Quilt Shop. Your inner borders are 1, 2, and 3 inches, and the outer borders are 4, 5, and 6. I was hoping for a 3.5. What I'm going to do for the outer border, I will use this. I'll use the 4-inch border, but I'm going to shrink it down a little bit on my machine. We'll see how that ends up turning out. I've never done that before, so we're going to give that a try next week. I'll be cutting these 2 inches wide, and these I'll double check and make sure that they're all uniform in size. They're a little bit over 4 inches. They're almost exactly 4 1/4. I may just leave them and work with them because we're going to trim them and even them up before we attach them to our quilt. So why not use a 4-inch quilting file? I probably could. It'll quilt the entire piece, but when I go to sew these on the quilt, the quilting is going to get sucked up into the seam allowance and it's going to look kind of weird. I'm planning on using the gray glow-in-the-dark thread for this. So inner border, outer border, and then we'll have our quilt here. I'm going to close off today with the papers because the whole quilt top isn't going to fit on the screen. We just completed section 3, 4, 5, 6 border blocks and we assembled the top. Next week we're going to attach the inner and outer borders, and I'll show you how to quilt borders in case you've never done that. We'll also be attaching our backing and our embellishments. There are a lot of embellishments for this. I've got a glue gun, I've got some quick dry tacky glue. Some of the stuff will probably need to be hand sewn on, so get ready to spend some time with your embellishments next week. Thank you so much for joining me for another week of the Candy Corn Quilt Shop Quilt Along. Let's check that off. One more week to go. I'll see you next time.